Welcome to LITE It Up, a podcast about resilient women balancing motherhood, their careers, personal lives, and all of the challenges that come along with being a superwoman. Each week, you'll be motivated to take action to lead, inspire, transform, and empower. Now, here's your host, Dr. Aginah Musherah. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of LITE It Up. I am your host, Dr. Aginah Musherah. Very excited about this episode because I have Dr. Femi Skanes, who has come back to join us as she promised in the episode a couple of weeks ago. So she has agreed to come back and join us on this week's episode of LITE It Up. Welcome, Dr. Femi. How are you?
I am well. Dr. Aginah, how are you today?
Doing very well. And I want to go publicly by saying I wish you a happy birthday, but you've celebrated a birthday since you were last on the show. So
Yes.
Happy birthday again to you.
Thank you so much. My birthday season is just always so much fun for me. It's really a time where I get to pause and reflect on all of the great things that have happened over the last year. And so I usually really think about it as a season of celebration.
Good. And I hope you're still celebrating.
It's wrapped up now.
Okay. You're not like some folks who draw it out and celebrate the entire month.
No, not a whole month, just a few days and that's it.
Okay. So when you were on a couple of weeks ago, we talked about a lot. But one topic that we agreed that we would come back to the table to discuss was blended families. And so I want to use this time because the last few episodes of the podcast, I've talked about my own experience going through a divorce and raising 3 children. And I also had 2 of my cousins on the podcast who talked about their journey with raising their children as single moms. And for some of us who have gone through a divorce or maybe not been married but have children and then decide that they want to jump into another relationship and give it a try, sometimes what comes along with that decision is the blending of families. And that can be sometimes it can be a challenging situation, but other times it can work out just very well. So why don't we take a little bit of time and kind of talk about your experience and why this particular topic is so near and dear to you.
So you have opened up Pandora's box. And so, listen, that's probably seven podcast episodes. But you know what, Dr. Aginah, it really wasn't until I was married for the second time and in a blended family that I realized even the depth of my own understanding for why I have such a soft spot or proclivity to support blended families. And so it really started before my marriage. And I didn't even realize that it actually started with my grandparents.
Oh, wow.
And so let me talk a little bit about that. So my grandfather, who I knew as my grandfather, I was probably an adult before it registered ever in my mind, though I knew it, that he was actually my step grandfather.
Wow. Okay.
But I knew that, right? So, but it was just that some of it was because he was married to my grandmother before I was born. Mm-hmm. We lived in Arkansas. My mom and I lived in Arkansas when I was a child. Mm-hmm. My biological grandfather still lived in Chicago. And so by the time we moved back to Chicago when I was 7, my biological grandfather died when I was 8. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't really spend, as much time with him. Although I've spent a lot of time with my biological grandfather's family. Mm-hmm. But just in terms of who I knew who, took me to church and carted me around, it was my grandfather. It was my step grandfather.
Okay.
And so I never even realized how that just set the foundation of who I was, right? And so it was never like I was his wife's grandchild. It was I was his grandchild, so much so that nobody would have ever known that he was my step grandfather. Though my mother called him George, right? So it's just kind of this interesting backstory. And so my parents, not having been together, my dad remarried, and I
Mhm.
was blessed, privileged to have um a stepmother. In fact, I ended up having another one, but my younger sister's mom, who my dad was married to, another one, always treated me like she was just always great to me. And so she's still Mama Cynthia to me, like to this day, right? Like she's not my stepmother or my sister's mother. She's Mama Cynthia, just a woman who's played such an instrumental part in who I am as an adult. Did not even putting the pieces together. And then I was amazingly blessed to have a stepfather. And so I've had these generations of step parents, but what I knew was a community who loved me and supported me and took care of me. And it was never any odds or any tension about who I belonged to. I belonged to the community, and the community loved me, and the community invested in me. So much so, like my stepfather and I were like two peas in a pod, up until he made his transition. And so he loved me and took care of me. And my stepfather, being a lot older than my mom, had raised his own grown kids. So here it is again. He's stuck, with an 11-year old. And he's like, uh, but our bond just worked. And my stepfather and my father were friends, and they respected one another. And once I became an adult, like they both would come over for Father's Day, and it was no jockeying for position, right? One was my dad, and one was Big Daddy, and that was just it.
Mhm.
So when I got remarried, all I knew was the healthy blending of families,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so that's just been my experience. And so now I find myself as the parent in a blended family situation. And so I'll be married again 8 years in August. And so ended up on my second go round marrying my childhood sweetheart, absolutely my best friend. But
Mhm.
that came with some blending of families. I came in with two biological children. He came in with one biological son. But the interesting thing is, unlike a lot of males, where the child is coming up on the weekends,
Mhm.
that was the story when we were dating and up through the first few months of our marriage. But my third son, my bonus son,
Mhm.
not my stepson by any stretch of the imagination, right? I have three children, two of whom I gave birth to, but three of whom I love. Um, he lived with us.
Okay.
So my blending is like deep, it's every day. So you see the history?
I see. But and listening to you talk about your grandfather, your step grandfather, you know,
Mhm.
and well, first, during that time, right, it was may not have been necessarily very common. I don't know. Obviously, the divorce rate now is much higher than what it was then, but um, it just shows that you had this foundation for, as you stated, the community raised you, right? And so there was no distinction, which is something that you don't necessarily see today with a lot of, blended families. Um, how do you think that, um, I guess, the foundation that you were raised upon helped with you being able to transition into your own blended family? Was it just absolutely no question that, these are your children without question? Um, where there just wasn't an issue? Did you have to sit down and talk about how things were gonna go? Because you mentioned that your son, when you were dating your then uh boyfriend, significant, I don't know what you call him as an adult, but
Chris. He was
Chris.
just Chris.
Okay. When you were dating Chris, was there any type of conversation about, well, when we get married, he's going to come and live with us, or did it just?
So if I could talk candidly about that process, right? And so let me just say something else about blended family. So not only is my own household blended, but my ex-husband now has two more children with his wife.
Okay.
And so though, I've raised our two kids together in my household, he doesn't live very far from us. And especially now that the kids are older and can drive, that, they're over there all the time. But he has these two additional children who in my mind are not additional, right? So I don't think of them as your little brother and sister or your half brother and sister. Those are just your siblings who happen not to share the same mom. And so I also have the dynamic of like, what does that look like for my children to have siblings of whom I didn't birth? So
Yeah.
there are a lot of dynamics to this. And so um honestly, my husband is an amazing father. And so he spent a lot of time. My other son, Chris Jr., CJ, lived in Florida, and then they ended up moving to Washington. So my husband spent a lot of time traveling, going to see him. And there was no doubt that if kind of ever, he and Monique, that's Chris Jr.'s mom,
Mhm.
had a conversation and it's like, hey, let's make a decision for him to live with you all. There was never any question.
Okay.
But it was actually Monique who kind of made the decision, like, he's getting a little bit older. I
Mhm.
think he should come live with you. Now, prior to that, so my husband is a firefighter.
Okay.
And so, firefighters, 24-hour shifts, right? And
Right.
so before he and I were actually married, while Chris Jr. was visiting in the summer, well, like Chris Jr. was either going to be with me or was going to be with his grandmother, Chris's mom. And so we were finding that, we have three kids the same age. Well, a lot of times he was with me.
Mhm.
And so you're with me without your dad. So now you're kind of in my care. And I finally said to Chris, like, listen, I just think that Monique and I should have a conversation because as a mother, as a woman, if my child is in somebody's care for 24 hours and their father, of whom I released them to, is not around, I just think that the right thing to do is to have a conversation about what this relationship should look like.
Mhm.
I wanted her to understand, like, you don't have to call Chris to figure, if you need to get to him or if you have a question or a concern, like, you and I can talk. And so I initiated the conversation, like, hey, Monique, like, let's just talk about what this is going to look like. So this was prior to our marriage. By no means has it always been easy.
Yeah.
Monique is an amazing mom. A lot of times we just see things differently,
Mhm.
but we have a common interest that we both love him, right? And
Mhm.
so even in our house, one of the things that I've always instilled in Chris and I have instilled in all three of our children is like, though, your dad and I are divorced, or, though Monique and Chris are not together, your other parent is still a part of our family because they're a part of you. And,
Mhm.
and that's without regard to how I'm feeling about, their dad or how he's feeling. Like, so we just have always been very respectful about, like, there are no secrets in conversation, or I don't not talk about the relationship that I had with their dad because
Mhm.
Chris is around, because I can't discount the fact that that's just part of who they are. So it's a lot of work though.
A lot of work and a lot of maturity, because as you're talking, I mean, I don't have that. My ex-husband and we've been divorced. It will be 8 years in November. I have not remarried. He has not remarried. I was in a relationship that lasted a lot longer than his relationship, although he was supposed to get married, like s- sort of like after our divorce, almost immediately after our divorce. But that's a different topic for a different day. So, as you can probably tell, there was not, you know, a positive interaction when it came to the conversation about blending of families, just because of the way that that process was going. And that's why I say it takes a lot of maturity, because when there are, and by no means do I think that everything, you have to get to a place where you can work together. And I think it really happens when you begin to remove the emotions that you have out of the way, and then think about the bigger picture, which of course are the children. Because there was something that you said about, you don't withhold any conversations or discussions about your children's biological dad just because Chris is around, because their dad is still a part of them. And so I feel like you have to always remember that, your children have two parents, and where possible, you should always try to make sure that your conversations are positive despite what's going on, because of the impact that that will have on your child. And I know I had to um check myself, or maybe my daughter checked me one day, because I remember saying something, not that it was negative about my ex-husband. I was just saying the difference in how we parent or how we do things. And she said to me, she said, "You do know that he is a part of me too. So when you say things like that, you're sort of talking about me too." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't think of it that way." And I don't know if it's because, I my parents were married until my dad passed away. So I don't necessarily know that world in terms of having a step parent or going in between parents, but I do have an older brother who would come to visit us for the weekend. So I do remember how that made me feel growing up, because there was this, there was a difference. We didn't live in the same household. So the set of rules that were in my household, the way my brother Jamil and I were raised, well, my other brother had a different set of rules because he lived with his mom.
Mhm.
So even with that, when you're talking about blended families and you have two households and two sets of rules, perhaps, how how do you talk through, or come to some type of agreement in terms of how the children are going to be raised, and what rules apply to your home? Are there different set of rules? How does that work?
So this is where the rubber meets the road.
Okay.
So first of all, it took a lot of calibrating for Chris and I to figure out how we were going to navigate the dynamics. And so, in a lot of ways, my ex-husband made it easy for me because he wasn't necessarily overbearing. It was kind of an unspoken understanding
Mm-hmm.
um, that my rules just kind of apply, right? Not in a controlling way.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he will fight me about it, only, on some things. Or he would say to me, like, why do you care if they're at my house? And I'm like, listen, well, the thing is, they're with me so much that just it relieves my own nervousness if you can just keep me informed of certain things. So there were some times when we had conflict, right? But for the most part, we never really had to argue about rules too much because in a lot of ways, he deferred to what my rules were or what my expectations were, especially around school. So I would say that he's definitely, and he'll say, like, what did your mother say about school? Now, there's some other things that we disagree on, especially as the kids have gotten older. Like, I think that he may let them stay like they're at his house too late, right? And I'm like, yeah, but that's because you don't have to argue with, my baby son getting up in the morning. So like when you all have hung out, yeah, well, you'll be asleep when I'm fighting him in the morning. So sometimes we'll bump heads on that a little bit. But I think that part about the rule navigation has been a little bit, that hasn't been too much of a conflict with me and their dad.
Okay.
Now, the rules, and even with Chris Jr., it's interesting because my husband is more so like what I say goes in my house, and that's just that. And so that's just been the standard of how we've operated. But I've had to, in a lot of ways, in my opinion, help Chris refine his belief system because I have said to him, like, I think that even though we're raising him in our house, that you could do a better job of communicating with his mom. It
Mhm.
might be your way and it might be your rules, but at the end of the day, she's still his mom. And even if you're going to make the decision, you owe her a conversation about the decision.
Mhm.
Right. And so I'm like, I'm a mom. I don't have to always agree with her to say, like, from a mother's perspective. So our rules have kind of been our rules.
Mhm.
With my daughter, she might have been about maybe 13 or 14. I really realized that there was really only one instance when
Mhm.
she may have tried to kind of pit me and her dad against one another.
Mhm.
And the minute that I realized what was happening, I was like, hey, get your dad on speakerphone.
Mhm.
And I just said very clearly, like, listen, you know what? Me and your dad can actually fight with one another
Mhm.
without your intervention. And so, and we just had a conversation with her, like, we still love you collectively. So
Mhm.
our rules have just they've worked for our family. And that's just been that.
I needed to talk to you about 8 years ago. Bec- because and you know what? Actually, I think maybe if I think I have to change my outlook on um on just the entire situation. So whereas as you were talking about educational decisions, for example, your ex-husband defers to you, whatever you.
Mhm.
And as you were saying that, I thought about my ex-husband who, even when we were married, it was the same because you and I both, we work in education. So,
Mhm.
but for me, I kind of I wanted him to be more involved, not necessarily in, or at least have an opinion or show some type of interest or something like that. You know what I mean? So that's where my frustration came in or comes into play, because I have a certain expectation. But then if I actually take a step back and think about it, he's probably allowing me to operate in my lane because he views that as that's an area in which he considers me to be an expert in. So I think it's all about how you look at the situation and how you know, in order to approach it in a healthy way. So
And
this
I
is
didn't say it doesn't bother. Sometimes it bothers me, right? But that's who he was when we were married. And so the truth of the matter is, if we could have worked those things out, we probably wouldn't have gotten divorced. So fundamentally, that's just where we're different. So people are who they are, right? And if it didn't change when we were married, I just guess I didn't expect that it would change when we were divorced. And so, there's some things that bother me, but I can either spend really what I find that happens is if you spend time wallowing in your past relationship, then that sucks the energy out of the energy that you need to effectively parent your kids. And so it's just a matter of, like, where do you want to invest your energy? Am I going to invest it in the hurt of the past, or am I going to invest my energy in what's happening with my children? And sometimes in relationships, we get so caught up on how we got hurt, that sometimes we forget, like, well, what did you bring into the situation that may have been hurtful?
right. Very true. All very true. Well, I know the one of the ways in which I operate, I just do what I want to do, what I think is best for my children, because at the end of the day, they're with me, they're with me. So
Yeah.
it really is at this juncture. There's no conversation, no discussion. I make the decisions, and that's just the way it is because like you said, how the person was prior to, so you can't expect them to change. And it took me really about, I would say probably a good 2 years to get to the point where it just absolutely did not bother me. Like I began to function as if there's no reason for me to have this expectation because it's going to lead to me being more and more frustrated. So I learned how to release that. Now, one thought that came to mind is as far as the children are concerned. How was that a smooth transition in terms of the siblings getting along and just kind of gelling or?
Um, So they did well, for the most part. I think that Monty and CJ, which were my two biologically, I
Mhm.
thought that they did a really good job of embracing Chris Jr., especially because Imani and CJ are only less than 14 months apart, about 13 and a half months. So they've always been really two peas in a pod.
Mhm.
So for them to accept in a third person, given this close dynamic, I
Mhm.
thought was the transition went better than I thought it would.
Mhm.
Um, the transition with us functioning in the role of an additional parent,
Mhm.
that took some time. Chris Jr. has spent the previous 11 years, 11 and a half years of his life with his mom. His mom and I have a very different um kind of parenting style. I guess I can speak for my parenting style, right? I'm very direct, and I said what I said. You'll do what I say, and I'll listen to you. But
Mhm.
I'm firm in my delivery, and so sometimes I didn't realize until he was older, and I'm just non-negotiable. But yet I'm compassionate and supportive. So sometimes I think it was more firm than what was emotionally safe and comfortable for him.
Mhm.
It took Monty and CJ a while to realize like that Chris is not a replacement, that he's an addition, but we never stopped saying that to them, right? And we never stopped um making sure that their other parent was just a part of our household. And so we believe in dinner table discussion. Like
Okay.
as they were going through their preteen years and their teenage years, we we ate, two of them off in college now. So we just stuck with Cavell Jr. But we ate dinner at the table probably 5 nights a week, whether it was takeout, whether it was whatever, right? Just nachos. Like we sat down at a table, all five of us, and we talked. And that's why I'm such a
Mhm.
so I have this concept of what I call dinner discussions, like the healing of the family. I just believe that families can heal and overcome anything at the dinner table.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of how we have been able to survive is that time at the dinner table. And we'll do fun stuff. Like we might do something where we go in a circle, and whoever is to your immediate left, you have to say something positive about that person.
Okay.
We might, and then we might go in reverse and like give that person a piece of feedback, something they can work on. So we've just had a bunch of conversations. We'll tell stories about Chris might tell a story about, when he was dating Monique. I might tell a story about when I was dating their dad. We openly say stuff like I'll say even in front of Chris, like, yes, I loved your dad. Like that was never any question because they have to feel like safe in their space. And but it's a lot of work,
Mm.
right? And so yeah, it's a lot of work.
Did did you ever, how long were you divorced before you got remarried or before you even started dating Chris?
So not long. Either
Not long.
one of us, not long.
Mhm.
So Cavell and I actually both got married pretty quickly.
Okay.
So our legal divorce took a lot longer than
Oh, you
a
know
lot,
that's
a
it.
lot longer. So I would say yeah, that's kind of hard just because it was
Yeah.
that gray area of the legal divorce. So
Right.
I mean, honestly, in a kid's world, probably very soon after, for Monty and CJ, for both of their parents to have gotten remarried, it was pretty soon after.
Did you ever think about what type of impact that would have on them, or were you, I don't know how I want to phrase that question. I mean, whether was there ever any concern about starting another relationship, because I assume they were relatively young too, right? Because I think
Mhm.
your son and daughter are like a couple of years older than my twins. Because
I
I don't.
did. I
Mhm.
thought about it, in hindsight and maturity. Are there some things I would have done differently? Absolutely.
Mhm.
But I do think that I did some other things kind of the right way.
Yeah.
So I did think about the impacts,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I'm cautious about that though, because sometimes, and this is just my opinion, and people have to do what what's best in their household dynamics.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think that well, I can speak for women,
Mhm.
don't want to move on because they don't want this concept of bringing another man around. So you
That's
can
how
find
it is. Mhm.
yourself stifled, and you can find your children manipulating your life
Mhm.
because they don't want another man around, right? Like, so I think it's a delicate balance. I definitely don't think that everybody that you date should meet your kids. I
Mhm.
think that there has to be a vetting process that goes along with that. But I also don't think that you should not engage in another relationship. It's actually a manipulative thing to allow kids to do to an
Right.
adult.
Right. And that's actually where I wanted to get to because I started dating soon after my divorce or probably before divorce was finalized. I don't know because um the marriage was over like a
Mhm,
really long time, before the divorce was finalized. But I waited an entire year before I introduced my children to the man that I was dating. They knew about him, they
mhm,
heard me on the phone or what have you, knew that there was someone I was seeing. But until I really knew that this person would be around, but I will say that for myself, it's I don't think my children have ever tried to manipulate the situation. In fact, they've actually encouraged me to date.
mhm.
I think I'm just too picky because, and I do tell men up front, if I don't think that you're going to be somebody that I'm going to keep around, and maybe I don't say it like that, maybe I say it a little bit nicer, but I will tell people that I am not quick to introduce my children to anyone that I'm dating. Because the one thing I don't want there to be like, and not that I'm dating a bunch of men, but I don't
Mhm,
want the perception that there's like this revolving door of different people. And if it's somebody who I feel like I can be serious about or what have you. So, in the time that I've been divorced, my children have actually only met three men,
mhm.
and two of whom are legitimately just friends now at this point. One I dated a little bit longer, um, but otherwise, so I do think that as women, as mothers, we can also use our children sometimes as an excuse or reason
Mhm,
not to move on and try to develop another relationship. I know that I have also been concerned about the dynamic of, especially because I have teenagers, um, at this juncture, having even thinking about getting married, if I were dating anyone seriously, in my mind, it's gotten to the place, well, they're getting ready to go to college next year. And then I have one more who will be home
mhm.
for 4 years, and then I can be free to do whatever I want to do. But I also can't keep my life on hold until 2025 either.
Right. So, and then I think that it is good for kids to see healthy relationships, right? So, let me say this. I don't know what life would have been like had it not been Chris.
Mhm.
So, my situation was different because, Chris and I have been friends and
Right.
since we were 10, 11 years old, right? Like we were high school sweethearts and we went our separate ways and that's just how life took us. So, there was a different kind of history
Mm.
there with Chris and I don't know what life would have been like had it not been Chris in terms of me dating. I'm sure I would have been much more guarded. But I will say that I believe that it is important for kids to see healthy relationship interactions. And so one of the things that I know that my kids have really learned from Chris is what it looks like for a man to love a woman and to respect a woman and to go to the ends of the earth for a woman. And so I think that's okay, right?
Right.
And I mean, and they see different dynamics of relationships and marriages. So your dad is remarried, and like, what does that mean? And so I
Yeah.
think it's okay. I don't want my kids to ever feel like, oh, if a relationship ends, like your life ends. Well, you go through some hurdles. Divorce is hard. I'll tell anybody going through a divorce, though you might want the divorce, there's still a period of grief.
Mm-hmm.
It's a loss. It's the loss of what you've known. So it's hard, but there is life on the other side of a divorce if you are willing to live it.
Absolutely. It certainly is. I know in the time that I was dating, um, I remember, so the man that I dated, he passed away. It'll be 3 years in September that he passed away. And I remember him saying he would send flowers, he would be there for every activity for my children or what have you. And I remember him sitting down at the table, we were at dinner, saying to them, saying to my son, I want you to see how a man should treat a woman. And he told my girls, I want you to see, how you should be treated. And I remember him telling me just how important that was to him, that he demonstrated that to them, and always, showing respect, for me. And I think that that's what my children miss seeing, because they know that I was very happy, then, and they saw that I was in a totally different place than where I was when I was married to their father. So I am grateful, for that they were able, to see that. Um,
But
but
actually, Agina, one of the hardest things about a blended family is not what happens in my household.
mhm,
One of the most difficult things about a blended family,
what's
the
that?
holidays.
Mm,
It's the holidays. It's how you're gonna split time.
mhm,
It's
mhm,
I think me and my ex-husband probably have disagreed the most around holidays and what time and whose time. And so we have, it's a point of contention.
mhm,
And it always has been. In my mind, I think I've tried to be like fair, because they have always spent a lot of holiday time, even with his side of the family, right? And I don't want to divorce
the
to
family.
snatch that away.
Mhm,
Um, but it's different now. And so holidays are tough for, like, if we're going to travel, it's like, okay, is Chris Jr., is he spending time with his mom and his grandparents, or like it's the navigating holidays that's the challenge, most challenging. Or there have been times when the holidays have just been me and Chris, because I've conceded and the kids have all, three of them have been with their other families, but it's coming up with what's going
mhm.
to work for the holidays that can cause some fights.
So how do you get through that? I mean, just
You
one
fight
person
it out.
has to fight it out, or and then somebody gives in. And how old are your children? But they're all
So now my youngest is 17, my other two are 18. Now they do what they want to do,
right.
right? Realistically, I'm like,
Right.
this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And they'll just say, like, oh, my dad, like Granny is doing, and she's cooking at this
Mhm.
time. I'm gonna go over there and blah blah blah. So now it just kind of works out. They're older, but when they were younger,
Yeah. I can
it was
imagine. Yeah.
challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. I and yeah.
Right. And their dad and I, though we actually have a parenting agreement that spells out the holidays, neither one of us stuck to it, right? So then it's like, well, we're not gonna stick to it when it's convenient. Either we stick to it or we don't stick to it. So the holidays, and all kind of special occasions,
Mhm.
celebrations, and all of this other stuff. One of the things that I think any parent has to do in a blended family is they have to set the expectations with their family.
Mm.
Like, you know, um, you have to set the expectations with your family. I just kind of leave it at that. Like, just in terms of how they engage with your children, that has also been, for a bunch of reasons, kind of a point of contention too,
Mhm.
around what you allow to be said about the other parent, like what you will defend in the kid's presence. And you know
Yeah.
and it's hard because there's still emotions that are wrapped up in it. Even though you've walked away, it can get challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. I
I'm respectful. Like, I people may think, like, I don't necessarily post Chris Jr. on social media, like as much as I post my own kids.
Mhm.
But you know why? Not because he's not as important to me. Um, like my husband doesn't post him a lot, right? So I kind of like follow the lead in that kind of way. So sometimes I will, but there are little things like I kind of try to defer to what's comfortable for for Chris and for his mom. And so some stuff is gonna be a little bit different. And you know, Chris and I have we don't always see eye to eye
Yeah.
on, you know, how we raise all three of them. So I
Mhm.
think it's just a lot of calibrating around the value system.
Yeah. And I think it's also helpful when you have similarities as far as your values are concerned as well. Of course, that's going to kind of help ease some of the challenges that you may have. What advice can you give moms and dads out there who are on the verge of blending families? Um, yeah, give us some advice.
So let me give some advice, some of which I have taken my own advice and some of which I haven't and I should have. Number one, um, it is check your own maturity.
Mm,
Check what energy that you bring into the situation, right? And so we're adults
mhm,
and we've had previous relationships, and that's just that. And so it's really what being mature about what you bring to the situation is one.
mhm,
Number two is family therapy and it's couples therapy early on.
mhm,
Number three, sit down and have a conversation around what will blended families look like for us. Just go ahead and have that conversation.
mhm.
Um, and I will say another thing: never ever, never ever. My one of my teachers will say we don't use double negatives, but never ever use language that indicates that they're not all three children.
Mm,
So I never say Chris's son, you know, like to
mm,
describe Chris Jr. It's
mhm,
our children. It
mhm,
is my children. It is, and that's just that. So now you'll hear me say Chris's mom, Chris, you know, I call him CJ.
mhm.
CJ's mom is Monique, but he's still my child.
Yeah.
And it like it's that simple, right? So I think it's also considering the language that gets used.
Mm.
So it's maturity.
Hey, what do your biological children call Chris, and what does Chris Jr. call you?
Oh, we by our
Oh,
first name. So
okay.
yep, he calls me Femi and they call him Chris.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So it doesn't yeah, it just kind of like it's funny when they call him Chris. It's almost like a term of endearment. So,
Mhm.
you know, I wasn't as concerned about the titles
Yeah.
as I was about like, but I still love you and respect
Mhm.
you, and you know, and that's just that. So,
Mhm. I like that you mentioned family and couple therapy because we know in our community in the past, now I won't say today because I think as a community we've gotten a lot better with going, seeking assistance when it's needed. Um, do you recommend therapy prior to the finalization of the blended family? Like if at the point in which you know that you're going to blend the family, do you recommend going into therapy at that point, at the dating stage? Well, when the dating is serious,
mm,
what's your
I would say yes,
Mhm.
because I think that it's just a regular part of a maintenance routine. So I would say yes, you know, to do some of that, and then to also make sure that you know, that you're spending just some fun times together that creates memories for that family. You
Mhm.
know, whether that's bowling, whether that's going out to dinner, we've gone on a lot of vacations together, and all of those kinds of things. And so I do think that therapy is good. And though in our community, I think that we have gotten a lot better about therapy being an option, I don't know that we're at that point about marriage counseling, right?
Yeah,
Because we're at that, like,
yeah.
you're not in my business kind of.
Yes.
We don't put people in our business. So I think that we can probably, there's room for growth when it comes to marriage counseling. Um, I've given you some like very real strategies, but it's not easy. I really want to reiterate that because I think that in some ways I may be oversimplifying it, but at the end of the day, it's tough, it's emotionally draining. There'll be some things that you all would never just agree on. And you have to make up in your mind. Like I have made up in my mind, I love my husband, right? I don't want to lose my husband over this issue. So what will I have to let go of, or what will I have to concede to for this to work? And then there's also some non-negotiables.
Mm-hmm.
I think though that you have to see people for who they are. I think that the reason sometimes blended families really struggle is because people overlook how that other person was treating the child before the marriage. If somebody is treating your child as if they are kind of a second class citizen, I don't care how well they treat you, that's not the person that you should marry. And so, one thing I can say 125%, Chris loves my children. He will go to the ends of the earth for them. And so, it's no, I treat this one way and I treat this one another way. People, women, I can speak for women.
Mm-hmm.
Keep an eye on what are some things that you're seeing, and you don't ignore those signs. We want companionship and love, but not at the cost of somebody mistreating your child, because what will happen is that can break the relationship that you have with your child, and you may never recover from it.
Absolutely. That definitely is great advice. um,
And I will say this, though we are a blended family and we do a lot of things together, there are just some times when I'll do stuff with just Monty and CJ,
mm-hmm.
even in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And there are just some times where Chris will do something with Chris Jr., even in the house. And we just talk about, this is just the cost of a blended family. And that's just how it has to be sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, pretty soon you'll be an empty nester.
And they can all go.
Are you counting down to that?
uh
They'll still come back.
yeah, CJ only has about another year. So it just kind of is what it is.
Mhm.
I won't say I'm counting down to it, but I'm not struggling with the house being empty either. Some people are like, oh, I'm going to be so sad. I don't know that I will be.
Yeah, I know I won't be. Although I will say that I was telling someone today that I have no idea what it's like to just have one child at a time, in a house, because the oldest are twins. So I've always had multiples around me. Now that's what I think is going to be an adjustment for me.
But you know what? It's funny that you would say that, because I will say that one change with us only having one child in the house now, and because we went from having three at one time to having one, because the other two, same grade, both went off to college at the same time. I think that with CJ, the youngest,
Mm-hmm.
we have two CJs, which is a
Right.
whole nother issue, right? There's Chris Jr. and there's Cavell Jr.
Mm-hmm.
With CJ Cavell Jr., now that it's just the three of us, um, I have to be more conscious about inviting him to things so he doesn't feel left out. Well, when he had the siblings, so if Chris and I went out to dinner and all three kids were home, it was no big deal. Like everybody got left at home.
Right.
But now I have to be more conscious about if we do that, and Cavell not feeling left out. And so it's funny because he'll say, you all didn't ask me if I wanted to go to dinner. And then I'll call the next time and I say, do you want to go to dinner? He's like, no. And then one time he finally just started laughing. He was like, I really don't want to go. I just want you to ask me. Right. And so,
Yeah, consider his feelings, right?
yeah. So, but it's some stuff I think is blended families, Aginah. And then I think that there's some things that are just like male, female
Oh,
things. And
yeah.
it's not about a blended family. It's just about a male, female perspective. I encourage families, blended families can work. They can work. You make them work. You don't try to pick up another model of how somebody else is doing it. You protect your family and your household, and you love one another, and you treat each other with respect. You agree to disagree, and they can work.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have, and you have given me some hope because I'm gonna tell you, I've been looking at the clock like, okay, when this person gets this age, then maybe it'll be okay. I think I just have in my head that it just, I don't know, not that it wouldn't work, but I just always wonder how that dynamic would work with bringing somebody else in the fold. So it's been very, very helpful to me because I have to be honest with you. Although I have children, when I date now, I will go on record as saying that my preference is that if I'm dating a man with children, that his children are around the same age as my children.
I think that's fair enough.
Yeah, because I I have teenagers who are independent and I just don't want to start all over again.
And I think what you highlight is being honest with yourself.
Yeah.
And that's when we get ourselves into situations. I don't necessarily want to start over with a 10-year-old, right? Like I don't want to go through those things again. And if you're not honest with yourself about that, I believe that the relationship will struggle.
Yeah. I removed myself from the beginning. I actually did that very recently with someone who has custody of his child, and they're like 6 or 7. I was like, oh no, I can't date you seriously.
Right. Like you don't even know your letter sounds. I can't do this.
Right. And that man was upset with me. Told me that I was missing a godsend opportunity. And I said, well, I guess I'll just have to ask God to send me somebody else because I don't want to be
Tell
bothered.
them use it to bless somebody else.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. So yeah, again, it's a lot of work that goes into it. A lot of conversation. I think communication is really the key.
Mm-hmm.
Communication, forgiveness.
Yes, absolutely. Here's a something that just crossed my mind, considering that, you work in education. Um, I'm sure in your experience, having been, an educator, now a building administrator, do you see sometimes where the dynamics or different situations with blended families may spill over into the school, in terms
Oh,
of impacting? So do you ever sit down with parents and try to kind of talk to them along those lines, considering that you have experience with having a blended family, and talk about how that.
absolutely do. And sometimes I'll tell them, like, you're wrong. So let me tell you what actually happened one time. This has been some years ago, but it was graduation time. And so we had given, let's just say 6 tickets, right? Mom gets the tickets, mom and dad get into it. Dad calls the school. She won't give me a ticket to his graduation. So I'm the one that paid the fees. I'm like, well, have you talked to her? I mean, they were at odds. There was no talking to one another. Mom was not giving up the ticket. Now the boy, the student had a good relationship with both of his parents.
Mhm.
So he's the in between. So you're telling me that the father, who you don't have a restraining order against, has not been physically abusive or emotionally abusive, you're mad, and so you're not giving him a ticket? This is a problem. Okay. All right, dad, here's what I'm gonna do. Come up to the school. How many tickets you need? Two, three, whatever.
Mhm.
I gave him the tickets.
Mhm.
And I called the mother and I said, so here's the thing. I understand that there is some conflict, but I also understand that you all actually have joint custody. And I will not be the one to deny dad from seeing him graduate because both of you all helped him get to the finish line. So she was like, I was gonna give him a ticket. And I said, well, it took you too long. So I gave it to him already. And so yes, I'm willing to have those conversations because it's that old, African proverb that when the elephants fight, that the only thing that gets trampled is the grass, right? When parents fight, the only person who really suffers are the children. So, ma'am, it's almost graduation morning and you haven't given up the ticket. And so she was like, I was gonna give him and his mama a ticket. Well, again, I gave it to him already. So I do.
Yeah.
But I'm also able to position it in a way, and I try to build relationships with my families in general, that I can say some of those heavy things. And because I've shown them, not just in words, but in action, how much I love them, and not just their child, but their family unit in general, that 98% of the time, that they're receptive to it.
Moms, we've got to do better now. Seriously. Okay. That is so
it happens. It happens. Oh, I could go on and on with like blended family. And there's a whole nother one for a whole nother day if you ever want to have this topic. What happens when the blended family is same-sex relationships? Because that is also something that, that happens too. And I've had that one that we've had to negotiate. So
you've got a lot of topics.
I know.
Well, this was really, really good. You've given me some things to think about. I hope that the audience has jotted down some notes and your 5 tips that you've given us as well, because I think you've shared just a wealth of knowledge that we can all use. All of us can do better. Because I know I just wrapped up 8th grade graduation, and I'm going to tell you, my children said, we are so proud of you. You did well. And I said, thank you.
Oh, my kids have told me that too. Like, can you act nice? I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yep. Yeah. And I did much better than what I did 3 years ago when the twins graduated from 8th grade, because I don't know if you've seen, but I posted pictures, and there's a family picture that didn't happen for the last 8th grade graduation. So I think I'm in practice for senior year for class of 22. So,
and you know what? And we'll end on this note. Let's talk about pictures. I am intentional about every event. If both families are there, all of us taking a picture together.
Yeah. And
all of us.
Yeah. And so I will say, I do that, but I'm the one that's taking the picture or suggesting to take the picture. Some folks don't want to be in the picture.
That happens.
Yeah, but it is what it is.
It happens.
Thank you so much. We really gelled. Thank you. See, we could talk more about this parenting and blended family stuff and the education stuff. We could talk about that too. But because this is really the basis of some of the things that we're talking about, definitely impacts what happens in the school building too, as well. So I thank you for agreeing to talk about this topic too. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me. And so until next time and the next topic.
Yes. All right. Well, you take care. And for those of you who are tuning in, don't forget to like and share and follow the podcast, and then leave a review. So you can email comments to info@aginahmuhammad.com or leave a comment on Facebook. So until next time, continue to light it up and shine bright like a diamond. Thanks for joining me this week on Light It Up. Make sure you visit my website at www.lightituppodcast.com or www.aginahmuhammad.com. You can also find me on social media using the handle @LITE It Up Podcast.
If you like what you've heard, please be sure to hit the subscribe button so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, I'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or you can simply tell a friend about the show. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a new episode. Until next time, light it up and shine bright like a diamond.